the fourth of the big cities, relatively big cities in Scotland, is Aberdeen. It's situated furthest to the north, and it's sometimes called the Granite City because many of the public buildings are built from the locally quarried granite. If you know anything about granite, again, I've never been there, but I've seen the films and documentaries and photographs. It's quite grey and dull, and if you've ever been to Scotland, you know that the weather in Scotland is perhaps not the most sunny in the world. So the sunny days are not as frequent as perhaps in the more southern parts of Britain, but if it happens that you get to Aberdeen on a sunny day, the granite of which the buildings are made sparkles. So apparently it has this quality of reflecting the light, of sparkling in the sunlight. So some of the buildings, like Marischal College, which is part of the university, here we have also the oldest buildings of Aberdeen University. They use this stone, and it's very beautiful. Speaking of universities, when England had two universities, Oxford and Cambridge, Scotland had four. So Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen and St Andrews. So this has always been the place where learning was highly valued. It was definitely more democratic than the universities in England, which only allowed the sons of rich aristocratic families in. In Scotland, they followed the European example, and there was basically an oral exam if you wanted to be a student, and you didn't have to be very rich to be admitted. So that's what we have, and this is really why you have, for example, in the 19th century literature, you have this figure of a Scottish doctor. So someone from a relatively poor family who had medical education in one of those great Scottish universities. So this is a wonderful place to study. As you can see in the photograph as well, we have a beach. So yes, the great outdoors and lots of sports, and also water sports. It's not a warm sea, but it has nice waves for surfing, for example. So yes, we'll talk about some interesting documentaries in a little moment, but it's not only the cities. I'm starting with the cities, but now we move to the great outdoors, and where to start better than in the Highland, the largest council area. As you can see, a very large area with beautiful places with a lot of nature, mountains and lakes and castles, and some of the famous castles like Eilean, as you can see here, situated on this little island. Some famous lakes like Loch Ness, with the legendary Loch Ness Monster. However, the true national animal of Scotland is the red deer rather than the Loch Ness Monster, because at least you can see them there. This is also the place where the Highland traditions and the Scottish traditions are probably the most alive. The languages, the Scottish Gaelic and Scots, are spoken, and here we have a photograph of a man wearing what's known as the Highland dress, so the traditional costume of Scotland, male costume with the kilt and some of the accompanying garments like the sporran, which is the little bag, a little pouch to keep the kilt in place, and garters and a special jacket and special belt with the buckle, and this is a modern version of the kilt, something that really became more formalized and tailored in the 19th century. This one is perhaps even more upgraded, as you can see the jacket and the shirt and the tie are very modern, so probably they look like something from the 20th century. But this is a garment with a very long tradition, and it developed over time into this more formalized, tailored garment, which to my opinion looks very manly and interesting. We also have this whole lore of the tartans, so the special checkered patterns that over time became connected with the clans, the families of Scotland, the noble families of Scotland. It also became formalized in the 19th century when the royal family, the Hanoverians, took some interest in Scotland after years or even decades of neglect. So now it's one of the aspects of Scottish culture that are most recognizable and well known. But coming back to geography, there is a part of the Highland called Lochaber, and as you can see, the map here shows its location, and it's a different map. It's not the map that you can see with the modern land division into the council areas, because they were changed in the 20th century. As you can see, the old location, the old division had smaller areas in the north. Later on, it was decided it wasn't necessary really to divide the land so much in the north, but sometimes you can encounter these old place names like Lochaber, referring to this western part of the Highland, and this is where you have some of the famous places like Ben Nevis, the highest peak in the United Kingdom. You can see it here, 1,344 meters. This is one of the so-called Munros. There was a guy called Munro. This was his name, who wrote a guide to the Scottish mountains, and all of the mountains that were higher than, I think, 3,000 feet, which is like just below 1,000 meters. He listed them all, and now they are called the Munros in his name, and it's something of a challenge for people who like mountain hiking to collect the Munros, so to climb all those higher hills and mountains of Scotland. We have Loch Morar, one of the Scottish lakes, the one that is the deepest lake in the United Kingdom. As you can see, these are mountain lakes. They are very deep because they were formed by the cracks in the land, basically in the stones. So they are not very wide in terms of area, but they are very deep. This one is more than 300 meters deep. Another word, a kind of geographical name that is very connected with Scotland is Glen, like Glencoe, which means a valley, a mountain valley. So here we have one of the mountain valleys, Glencoe. Again, a place rich in history, the history of the clans, the history of the clan feuds, and basically private wars between the aristocratic houses of Scotland, which is very interesting and bloody, and of course, you can imagine why Scotland inspired all kinds of dark stories, from Shakespeare to the Game of Thrones, really. So, yeah. So moving away, the next council area is Moray, as you can see here. They have the university, which is located furthest to the north in Scotland. It's called the University of Highlands and Islands. One of my friends worked there and he called it the Seal and Puffin University because you have lots of seals and puffins. Puffin is the little bird that you can see here on the photograph living there. So I would say it's more the place recognized for nature rather than culture, but they have a university there. Next, Aberdeenshire. So as you can see, this little white spot on the map is the city of Aberdeen, but the whole area is larger. This is the place which has very long royal connections, but not far back in history, but to the 19th century. So Balmoral Castle, still a royal residence today, was a castle bought by Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert in the middle of the 19th century. It was rebuilt and expanded and made as Scottish as they could, and it became one of the most favorite and beloved places of Queen Victoria to spend her holidays there. So yes, never been there. I would love to go, and I hope to see it one day. So here we have the photograph of Balmoral Castle, and also one of the paintings made by Queen Victoria's favorite painter, an English painter who accompanied the royal family when they visited Scotland, called Sir Edwin Landseer. And of course he was asked to paint a lot of landscapes and other things like the animals perhaps of Scotland during the royal visit. So here we have a Scottish landscape. Well, this is one of the farms that were located near Balmoral Castle. So that's it. Next one, the council area of Angus, with another beautiful, this time much older castle, Glamis Castle. You may recall it from Shakespeare's Macbeth, but there is also another connection here. This was the home of the Queen Mother. The Queen Elizabeth, the mother of the present Queen, she was born in Scotland. She was from Scottish nobility. She was born and bred in Glamis Castle. And another interesting thing here is the Bell Rock Lighthouse. Here, painted shortly after it was built by one of the greatest landscape painters in the history of Britain, Joseph Mallord William Turner. And when it was first constructed in the first half of the 19th century, this was one of the greatest feats of engineering, because this was built in such an inhospitable place, the place that was basically unreachable for parts of the year in the winter, when the lighthouse was most necessary because of the storms that could lead to the wreckage of ships passing there. The engineers who built this lighthouse were from the Stevenson family. So if you recall, the writer famous for example, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is his family. He was the only writer in the family. The rest were engineers who built something like that. Then we moved to next area, Perth and Kinross. There are lots of beautiful castles, and some of them are still used as habitable places, like Blair Castle. Some of them were kept in beautiful state, and basically they are still used. They have lots of traditions, like for example in Blair Castle they have the only private army in Europe. By special permission of the Queen, they have some sort of regiment of basically security people, and they are treated like an army regiment of this castle. Lovely place, been there, it's lovely. Another interesting area is the council area of Fife, and we have at least 3 very, very interesting things here. One is another UNESCO site, the Forth Bridge. As you can see, it's very spectacular. It looks modern, even though it was built in the 19th century, and it's one of those great feats of Scottish engineering. It's not coincidental. There was a lot of engineering in Scotland with the education and the Industrial Revolution and all that. Also, we have the city of St Andrews. Here you have a view of the old university. You may recall when we talked about patron saints, they had the Cathedral of St Andrew, which reportedly had the relics of the saint, but it was destroyed during the Reformation. And they also have the oldest golf course in the world. So we'll perhaps return a little bit to the Scottish sports in a moment, but there you go. The last image here is of a small town called Carras. If I mispronounce these names, please forgive me. I'm trying to remember how they were called. This one I actually had the chance to visit. It's a beautiful, lovely little town with some dark history of witch trials and the persecution of the supposed witches. So it's all in the area of Fife. Next, we have the area of Stirling, with the city of Stirling famous for 2 things. One of the main royal castles in Scotland, the older one than in Edinburgh, belonging to the kings of Scotland. It's also situated on a hill, similar to Edinburgh Castle, and on another hill opposite it there is this huge 19th century monument to William Wallace. If you saw the movie Braveheart, that's the story. This is the story of a freedom fighter and military leader fighting for freedom of Scotland against the English invasion. And near Stirling there was the very famous battle, the Battle of Stirling Bridge, which was won by the Scots against the army of the English king Edward I and his son Edward II. So this is one of the places with the most historical relevance in Scotland. Then we have 2 more council areas of Falkirk and Clackmannanshire, and as you can see, what I found are the modern points of interest. One is Falkirk Wheel, which is again a wonderful achievement of engineering. This is an aqueduct lift. This is actually a boat lift. You may recall we talked a little bit, we'll definitely talk more about the Industrial Revolution at some point, and this is perhaps the last thing to put on the slide list there, the modern version of a boat lift linking to two canals. The other one is a huge modern sculpture called the Kelpies, which shows those two heads of horses, which are connected to the Scottish legendary tales of fantastic beasts. We'll return to the Kelpies when we talk about the British legends. They are like spirit horses, and of course they were also made to commemorate and kind of appreciate the achievement, the help and hard work of very many real horses, especially during the Industrial Revolution and later. The next place is Argyll and Bute, with some beautiful places you may recall from our talk of the national parks. Loch Lomond. This is the view of Loch Lomond seen from Ben Lomond. So again, a place of natural beauty with some cultural significance. If you recall the song called Loch Lomond about the Scottish soldiers yearning to return to this place. More castles. There are castles everywhere, some of them beautiful, like Inverary Castle. We'll talk about it a little bit more in a while, but it's located here. And one of the smaller places, the village of Dunoon, holds the Highland Games, the biggest event. There are a few places that hold similar events, but this is if I found it right, the biggest one. The Highland Games are traditional sporting events with some traditional competitions like tossing a caber. You can see here a strong man with a big log of wood throwing this log of wood, and that's the point. So the Highland Games were basically about strong men competing. So yeah, you have it here. Then we have the area of Ayrshire, which can be divided into three more parts. So east, south and north. Here you have the map, and this is also the place with the most important and famous golf courses in Scotland. I mentioned already in St Andrews they have the oldest golf course. They have more of them here in the west of Scotland. The areas of Renfrewshire and East Renfrewshire are among the places connected with the Industrial Revolution, especially the area of the town of Paisley. Here we have one of the old mills from the late 18th century which produced textiles, especially the replica versions of cashmere shawls from India. And this pattern that you can see here on the photograph, this is called a Paisley pattern in Britain because of those replica shawls that were made in Scotland. So it looks like an Indian shawl made of cashmere wool, but it's much cheaper and it's made locally. Another area connected with the Industrial Revolution are the areas of Dunbartonshire and Lanarkshire. So we have a lot of small villages and towns connected with the industry and mining and such thing. And among them we have one of those 19th century model villages. You may recall Saltaire and Port Sunlight. So they have one in Scotland. It's called New Lanark, and this was built by one of the industrialists as a housing estate for his workers. Like other model villages, it's like everything was provided for. We move to the south, and we have two more council areas in the south. One is called Dumfries and Galloway, and it is connected with the national poet of Scotland called Robert Burns. He lived in the city of Dumfries, and this is one of the places he actually lived in. Robert Burns's house. This is the man who wrote a lot of beloved Scottish poetry, sometimes in English, sometimes in Scots. You all probably remember the song Auld Lang Syne. This is based on his poem. Also the poem about the haggis, the national dish of Scotland. We'll return to this later on when we talk about regional foods, and many other interesting and still beloved poems. So this is where he lived. And if we move eastwards a little bit, we move to the Scottish borders. This is again the area of outstanding cultural importance and a literary connection. Here we have Abbotsford House, which was a residence of Sir Walter Scott. So this man who basically reinvented Scotland and Scottishness in the early 19th century and made Scotland fashionable and famous and sexy and beautiful again. So he made a lot of money on his novels. He squandered it a few times over, but when he was successful, this is where he lived, Abbotsford House. There are also some beautiful old abbeys, mostly in ruined states, such as Jedburgh Abbey and Melrose Abbey. So the places connected with Christian monastic life, destroyed during the Reformation, but still beautiful. Yeah, been there. Beautiful, really beautiful. And the last map here, before we move to the extra thing, is the map of the Scottish whiskies. So yes, this is again a different division. We have the lowland and the highland, but also some smaller regions like Speyside, Islay, this one is called not Islay but Islay, Campbelltown, and Island whiskey. So if you are connoisseurs, if you're interested in the regional drinks, this is what you can find. So a slightly different division. And yes, we'll move on to the extra part in a moment.